All right. Can everyone see a slide deck? Cool. All right. Well, so first, I'd like to have each of our speakers introduce themselves. Robert, would you like to go first? You're on mute, Robert.
Sorry, I'm Robert Adams. I live in Lakewood, and I'm part of a group called Livable Lakewood, which is a grassroots group that's sort of newly emerging in Lakewood to try to create a more centralized voice for progressive policy around things like housing and transit and other things. So uh, I think that voice, that centralized, cohesive voice, has been kind of missing in Lakewood until now. So we're trying to fill that excuse me, fill that gap, and part of that is trying to involve ourselves in the zoning conversation. So that's me.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Stefco is going to join us. I think she had a last minute emergency, so she's not on now. Maybe she'll be able to join later. Um, but for now, we're going to move on to Max. Can you introduce yourself, Max?
Hey everyone, Max Nardo. I work with Matt at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. Um, I won't do a big bio, but some of you might know me from my former job at the Capitol, where I worked as an environmental policy staffer for the Dems for the last couple years. And over time, I just increasingly saw how important housing and land use policy is to all these conservation issues that I cared about. So in March, I came here to Sweep to work on this stuff full time.
Thanks, Max. Here's a look at our agenda for this evening. We're going to start with an overview and the Lakewood context and the proposed zoning changes with Robert. If Steph is able to join, she has a few slides here on sort of the affordable housing angle. And then Max is going to close us out with more of the environmental considerations, as well as some research he's been doing in cities that have already adopted some of these reforms, like Portland. All right, Robert, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, like I said, I live in Lakewood, and so we're going to start, I think, pretty zoomed out about sort of how the Lakewood built environment looks generally, and then we'll try to zoom in closer and closer to zoning itself and talk about what's in the code and so forth. And then I'll pass it to the others to talk in more depth about what that really can mean in the future. But yeah, I live near O'Kane Park, and that's actually in Northeast Lakewood, which is one of the more dense, sort of slightly more urban parts of the city. Yet, if I want to go to Denver for some reason, it would take me over an hour by public transit. So this is just indicative of how the city has been constructed over decades. It's not just zoning, but it's a lot of factors, but zoning is one of them. Um, you want to go to the next slide? However, if I want to drive the same distance, same places, it would take me about 10 or 15 minutes. So this is just trying to illustrate how Lakewood is really built around cars. That's a result of sprawling single family housing over decades. And this is kind of, among other factors, of course. So, but this is kind of the lived experience from me living in Lakewood in an area that actually should be, you know, more suited to bike lanes and pedestrian ways and things like that. But it's really a struggle. And that's kind of, one of the reasons I've gotten into this kind of advocacy to try to start to find ways to improve the way the city is built and how, amenities are managed and so on. And yeah, it's just car centric. And that means a lot more parking lots, a lot more emissions that affect the local air quality, carbon emissions towards global warming, and all these other factors. So, it's not all zoning, but it does feed a lot into that. And there's an interplay there. Do you want to go to the next slide? Even if I want to go 2 miles away to our beloved Belmar Park, seems like it should be an easy bike ride. It's actually not. There are very few protected bike lanes. And, you know, I have to kind of contend with traffic. And anyone who's ever ridden a bike knows that's not much fun. And in this particular trip, I have to cross Wadsworth, which is truly a nightmare. And even if I want to go to King Soopers for some grocery shopping or something, like it's really a struggle, and everything is geared towards driving, right? I think people mostly are familiar with this. and the driving and the housing, they're interconnected. Do you want to go to the next slide? It's harder to put in like a map form, but a lot of people talk about the housing crisis in the abstract sense. But in Lakewood, there's really serious shortages of affordable housing for a lot of people. And this is an image taken directly from a regional housing needs assessment that was presented to City Council just this past Monday, which took in a lot of research and kind of condensed it down to some findings that I think highlight sort of where the market is falling severely short for people. And this chart shows that 1 in 4 people in Lakewood are at this moment severely cost burdened by housing. And that means that they're paying more than 50% of their income on their housing, and that's a really hard situation to be in. And I'm not in the severely cost burden category, but I'm definitely on this chart somewhere. And I mean, I think most people around my age, like younger families or younger working class people, they really have a hard time if they're working in Lakewood trying to live there and afford to live there in terms of housing cost. And this assessment also estimated that Lakewood needs about 8,640 new units by 2032. So that's in the ballpark of 1,000 per year for the next 7, 8 years. And of that 8,000 something, the majority of it needs to be affordable and attainable for people making less than 50% of the area median income, which if you're a family of four, that's $58,000. So whether you're in this category or not, you can imagine that that amount of money doesn't go far in terms of housing in Lakewood, and that creates a lot of problems for people, and it feeds into some people becoming unhoused and a lot of other things. So, do you want to go to the next slide? City Council is, of course, kind of aware of these problems, and this is yeah, they've been undergoing a lot of studies and plans that are trying to directly look at this and find solutions. So one of these is the strategic housing plan that was passed in 2024, where a lot of these problems were more quantitatively identified. And then this and other things fed into the comprehensive plan, which is Envision Lakewood 2040, a 15-year plan, which is something like a couple years of work and all kinds of stakeholding and lots of residents giving feedback and a very long, thorough process that identified a lot of different strategies and goals to work towards some of the things that the city wants to improve upon. And so I don't know if I'll read them, but I mean there are several strategies aimed at housing and affordable housing, um, expanding housing choice and options, keeping residents stably housed. And then there are goals associated with this, like reducing homelessness and making more complete and engaged neighborhoods, so on and so forth. So, if you want to go to the next slide. One of these goals in particular is a diverse, affordable, and accessible housing market. And that's goal 19. And at the top of the list of strategies for that is a diversity of housing types. Encourage a mix of housing types through development, regulations, policies, and incentives to accommodate different household sizes, income levels, preferences, and needs. So all of these housing related things are interconnected, and zoning influences a lot of them, but I think it's geared squarely towards really this particular strategy more than some of the others. So that's why I wanted to highlight this as, one of the pieces of the puzzle to try to sort of improve affordability for people. You want to go to the next slide? So what do we mean by variety and options? Anyone who lives in Lakewood knows that the vast majority of what you see is detached single family homes. I think it's in the ballpark of 60% of the land use is currently zoned for single family only. So we have a lot of that, and then we have some mid-rise apartments in certain areas that might meet the needs of some people. If that's a good thing to have near transit if they're commuters and other things. But if you're a family, that might not be what you're after. And if you're a young family, you might not be able to afford a detached single family home. But a sort of small or moderately sized apartment, which is mostly what apartments tend to be, might not be a good fit for you. So over decades of policy that's sort of forced housing development to be in these two extremes has sort of uh, it's not been permitted. It's basically been illegal to build a lot of these so-called missing middle housing types like duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, and so on, which are I mean, more details will come on this later, but they're lower cost to build and they're more affordable for people and it makes better use of the land. And that's really missing in Lakewood, and that's what some of the zoning changes that are proposed are intend to enable. So yeah, this is, not just young families, but also older people that are maybe they had a full house and their kids have moved out and they want to downsize to reduce their cost or to reduce the upkeep required or any number of reasons. They don't have a lot of options, so sometimes they'll have to move far away. Maybe they have to move away from their community, away from their families. So this missing middle problem is really affecting a lot of different people, and it's pretty far reaching. You want to go to the next slide? So moving from that to how the zoning itself is intended to really target this. So this is again meant to be like a very high level sort of overview of the flavor of what the zoning changes are. I'm not going to get into every zone type and all the numbers associated, but in broad strokes, right now, again, the vast majority of the land is zoned for single family only. But there are very few restrictions on what can be built in that single home. So basically, most houses are kind of moderately sized, but if you wanted to, you could get a lot like this and build a mega McMansion with, depending on the lot size, maybe 17,000 square feet or 16,000 square feet. And, that's of course not what most people want. It's not affordable for most people. It's not serving the needs of the gaps of what's needed right now for people. But this is basically the current zoning structure is that you can have one unit and you can more or less do whatever you want with the size. You want to go to the next slide? And generally speaking, the shift that this zoning change is intended to do is add new restrictions on the size. So it uses a gross floor area limit for 1 to 2 units. That would be 4,000 square feet. For 3 or more units on a lot, 5,000 square feet. And there are currently 9 different residential, low form residential zoning types that are going to be collapsed into three. So it's A, B, and C, which is a kind of rural, suburban, and urban type, which has different lot size requirements, different setbacks, height restrictions, and so on. I'm not going to get into all those details. If you're interested in those, you can download the full zoning draft document on the Lakewood City website. And table 4, if you find table 4, that's where you see like a lot of the numbers on setbacks and other things if you're curious about that. But I want to just kind of explain that it's imposing a lot of new restrictions on size to make sure that houses or structures can't be built that are like wildly out of that don't fit in their sort of neighborhoods. Um, but the flip side is that if someone wants to build a duplex or a triplex or some other housing type that might serve more people in that area, while still sort of fitting into the neighborhood, that would be allowed, whereas previously it wasn't allowed. So I think in broad strokes, this is really the shift that's happening. And there are still setback requirements, height restrictions. There's green space requirements. I think it's usually 50%, and a lot of other details that we won't go into necessarily. But um, I just want to make sure people see that it's kind of reducing a unit restriction and adding some size and footprint constraints, basically. I think that's like the broad stroke of what's happening in this zoning draft, for people to understand. I forget if I have another slide or if that's all. Oh yeah. And there's of course a lot of other things. It's a 350 something page document, and there are a lot of deep details we couldn't possibly get into today, but there are some new requirements where there are neighborhood meetings that need to take place if someone wants to build near a park, added distance requirements between parks and new buildings. These are, I think, pretty much likely a result of the conflict with Belmar Park and the development near there, trying to like prevent those kind of conflicts in the future. It's going to become easier to build accessory dwelling units like backyard cottages, garage conversions, granny flats, and so forth, which can meet some housing needs in some cases. And small, low impact retail use with limited hours will become permitted in residential areas. I think the size limit is something like 900 something square feet, and there are restrictions on what time of day, and you can't have drive-throughs. So it's intended to be very like low impact small businesses that kind of serve the nearby community in hopefully welcome and cool ways. I think most people want to have those kind of things near them that you can walk to and enjoy. Not currently allowed, but the zoning would hopefully allow that in the current draft. Increase incentives for sustainable buildings, removal of arbitrary limits on number of people living in a home. So this is coming from state law changes that require this. There are still limits according to health and safety or fire code or what have you, but some arbitrary restrictions that were in place in terms of unrelated people living together and stuff like that will be removed. And lastly, on this list, not certainly lastly in the zoning changes, but allowing more parking flexibility for multifamily and affordable housing near transit, which is again coming from state law changes. And so, yeah, we couldn't possibly cover every detail, but I think this is some of the real highlights and the real noteworthy things to be aware of that are in the draft. I think that might be my last slide. Yes.
Okay, I think we're gonna skip this for now and hope that our third presenter can join us a little bit later on, and we'll go out of order in my slides. Great. Again, Max Nardo, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I am going to use my time here to talk about two things: the environmental benefits of this kind of growth, and then we're going to do a deep dive into Portland, Oregon, which recently implemented a really similar slate of policies. And I think the results there are pretty promising, so they're worth taking a look at. Um, Go ahead to the next slide, Matt. Uh, In his State of the State speech a couple of years ago, when Governor Polis was rolling out his housing agenda, he made the point that housing policy is water policy, it's climate policy, it's transportation policy, and they are very deeply linked. And I think we should consider them in those terms. So I'm going to make about 4 points here on the environment before we go into the case study and then do a little Zillow tour of what's on the market right now. So this first slide is a map of the climate impact of different neighborhoods, and it takes into consideration energy use and transportation. And it's at the census block level. It's okay if you can't read the scale. You can get the idea. The orange places have higher carbon footprints, and the lighter colors toward the center indicate lower carbon footprints. And the point is that compact neighborhoods have relatively smaller homes on smaller lots, and they have shorter commutes because they're closer to daily needs. And collectively, this really uses a lot less energy and has about half, these places have about half the greenhouse gas impact per capita of places out on the fringes with larger homes and more energy use and longer commutes. Go ahead to the next slide, Matt. We don't have too many dense slides here, but I wanted to take a minute with this one. This is from the state's greenhouse gas inventory. So it includes the state's current thinking on greenhouse gas emissions from different sectors and projections for these emissions um, into mid-century. So this is showing what is called the so-called roadmap scenario. So it's under current and expected carbon reduction policies. So the top bar there is for electricity generation. And I want to highlight this to show that in some sectors of the economy, we're decarbonizing very quickly. The greenhouse gas impacts of electricity generation are expected to drop by about three-quarters in this single decade, the 2020s. So I think that's great. Unfortunately, during the same decade, transportation emissions on the third line there aren't expected to move at all. And that's a kind of a hard thing to let sink in. With all the electric vehicles we've adopted, those gains are offset by more driving. And cutting back on the EV credits is going to be yet another headwind. The other one I want to talk about is the second row, RCI, that's residential, commercial, industrial. That just refers to buildings, and it mostly describes natural gas heating. So this one drops 20% over this decade, but it's really sticky. Both the heating and transportation, they're just really sticky in these forecast scenarios all the way out to 2050. And the goal is to get to zero by 2050. So I say all that to make the point that housing policy really does have the power to unstick a lot of these, and I'll be trying to make that case over the next couple of slides. Go ahead, Matt. So many people here know that the transportation sector is right now the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, more than any other sector in the state. It's also farthest behind its decarbonization goals. So we're not seeing anywhere near the pace of reduction that we are with electricity generation. And we're just talking climate impacts now. That's not even to mention air pollution. And when we build things far away, which has been the predominant development pattern, we're locking in generations of longer commutes and trips for everyone that lives there. The bottom of the slide, it comes from the Blueprint Denver plan, and it shows that a huge differential. If you live in an inner urban neighborhood, uh, there's a lot less driving needed than the standard development pattern or a far-flung development pattern. Go ahead. So to talk about buildings, so that was that RCI category. So heating and cooling consumes the most energy in homes. And single detached houses are bigger. They have four walls and a roof to insulate. So, of course, they take more energy. And on the other end of the spectrum, apartments with shared walls and a floor and a ceiling, they have the least to insulate and they take the least energy. And townhomes, which are a big focus of this Lakewood zoning code update by legalizing them in more places, they're in the middle. They use about 30% less energy than a detached house. So we thought this was a cool graph from a Washington Post piece from last year. And again, this is important because heating is sticky. It's a lot of natural gas, and more people are adopting heat pumps, but also a lot of new homes are still equipped with gas, and we don't have an easy way to decarbonize this sector. So the things we build now, many of them are going to be burning gas into perpetuity until we have some technological breakthrough. Go ahead, Matt. So a quick note on water use. This one might be the most obvious. Water is sometimes called our most precious resource, even if our laws and our tap fees don't always reflect that. It is nonetheless scarce and expensive. Getting new water service to a new home in parts of the state, like the Northern Front Range, is really expensive, like $30,000 to $50,000 per house, which includes the cost of the water right, which is accounting for a half an acre foot or a third of an acre foot per house. And the differentials here are pretty extreme. Compact development uses a lot less water. So the second light gray bar on here is a typical single family house. And two bars to the right is basically townhomes, referred to here as small multifamily. And these use about a third of the water for a typical single family house. And that's just a typical house. Large houses use much more. And this differential is almost all outdoor water use. Indoor, it's pretty flat across the housing types, which is notable because indoor water use goes back into the treatment system and gets reused, whereas outdoor water use doesn't. And one more side note on this. Many tap fee schedules, the system development charge you pay to obtain that water right to build the new house, they don't really reflect this differential. There's a lot of overcharging for small compact development that uses small amounts of water and undercharging for large lots with big lawns. So this is a very frustrating cross-subsidization of large lot development. So I just wanted to point that out for everybody and also shout out to Representative Rebecca Stewart, Lakewood Zone, for taking a crack at this at the legislature last year. Go ahead to the next slide, Matt. The last environmental point here is about land use. So as a starting point, under current development practices, the state expects about half of new housing to be added onto greenfield and natural lands at the edge of the urban area between now and mid-century. That is lots of land use. That is lots of land used, paved over, also far from jobs and transit, and thus inducing a lot of driving. And that 50% expectation, that was from the Colorado Energy Office. So here's a couple of scenarios. This is from the Rocky Mountain Institute. The top chart is a baseline scenario. The yellow color is single family homes, largely on greenfield lands. That's kind of a status quo development pattern. Now, the bottom chart is the same amount of housing, but focused in urban areas under more of a smart growth scenario. And the difference is an 82% reduction in per capita land consumption. And these are the types of policies that are being looked at by Lakewood in this update. And we're doing environment here, but just a quick note on infrastructure costs. We're facing intersecting problems here, environmental collapse and also escalating cost of living. So building brand new infrastructure is a very costly thing to burden ourselves and future generations with when we could be getting much more out of the roads and pipes and wires that we've already built. But I'll leave it there for now. So wrapping up the environmental piece, and you can go to the next slide. All of that is to say that more compact housing has very potent benefits across the conservation spectrum. We talked about land, energy, water, induced driving. Under the Trump administration, there's a lot of talk in the conservation community that without having the federal support that we had under the Biden administration, we need to look harder at local levers. And in my view, this is the most powerful local lever that we have. It's almost exclusively local and it's very powerful. It's sometimes overlooked as an environmental issue, housing that is. So I hope I've made a short case here that this should be elevated to very serious environmental policy. The image in this tool on this slide, this is a tool created by UC Berkeley to compare the decarbonization potential of different climate strategies that are within local control. Now, this is for Sacramento specifically, so it's not a perfect comparison, but it makes the point that urban infill is by a pretty wide margin the most powerful climate policy that is within local government control. So just to refer back to Lakewood's comprehensive plan, the city has stated that having a sustainable, built, and natural environment is a core goal of the city. So in my view, if you want that, Lakewood's zoning code update is how you do that. I'm not really aware of a realistic alternative to having a sustainable built environment under these conditions. Okay, that's all on the environment. Now we're going to talk about middle housing, just a little bit about where this exists in the political zeitgeist right now, and then we're going to dive into the Portland case study and look what they're getting from the result of their reforms, and then take a stroll through Zillow. So we're particularly excited about the middle housing thing. Lots of cities in lots of cities in Colorado are looking at loosening up zoning for a neighborhood that currently only allow single family houses and allowing townhomes and triplexes there. Denver just kicked off an advisory committee to look at this, to name one. So support is growing for this kind of policy. Zillow did a national survey, found pretty strong support. It's in the slide. They had a Denver subset of that. It was stronger still. Lakewood looked at this in their housing needs assessment that Robert mentioned earlier, and it found a strong plurality. About 50% of people support allowing triplexes and what have you in single family neighborhoods, with about a third opposed and a lot of undecided, don't know. One more fun data point that just came out, Colorado Springs is also doing a housing needs assessment. And through some of their surveying, this is in the yellow box on the right side, uh, when offered kind of the entire spectrum of new housing, the townhomes and duplexes and triplexes and mixed use development were the most popular options. Now, granted, that's Colorado Springs, but also that's Colorado Springs, not a place that is known for embracing a lot of, dense housing or urbanism. So I want to move on to um, this slide shows that current development patterns give us a lot of big houses on big lots and a lot of apartment buildings. The dark green bar at the bottom, this is, sorry, I'll back up. This is regional housing production in the Denver area over the last 20 years. The big green bar at the bottom is single family houses. The lighter green bar at the top is apartment buildings with 5 or more units. And those little yellow lines squeezed into the middle are buildings with between 2 and 4 units. So your duplexes and your townhomes live there. And I want to make the point that this is a very traditional development pattern. It's really been squeezed off in the last handful of years here, which is why it's known as missing middle colloquially sometimes. But before the 80s, these middle-sized developments made up about 10 times as much of the housing mix as they do now. So we're talking about traditional forms of housing here. This is not a new thing. This is something that has recently become kind of an endangered species. You can go to the next chart, Matt. Okay, this is the last dense slide, I promise. This is also from the Lakewood Strategic Housing Plan, and there's a couple things I want to highlight here. The upper section of this chart shows single-family homes, and the lower section shows townhomes and duplexes. So one of the first things to note is that townhomes and duplexes that are existing in the city right now, when they go for sale, they cost $230,000 less than single-family homes. Also, on the top left of this chart, I'll note the increasing size of houses. I think we all know this from observing it, that when a small house gets scraped, a lot of times you'll get something like a McMansion in there. The pre-1960s homes are 1,300 square feet, and the new ones are literally double that. So Robert touched on how current housing development patterns really don't meet all the needs. And I'm going to add a little data to that. Households of all ages are shrinking in size. This might be kind of a startling fact. Right now, approximately 2/3 of the homes in the Denver region house only 1 or 2 people. The 65 and over population is projected to double by 2050, with a lot of older adults looking to downsize. That's one reason that AARP has middle housing as a top policy priority. So I say all this to highlight the mismatch between needs and emerging needs and what our current development patterns are delivering. So that's all on that. I'm going to move on to the Portland case study. So Portland, my hometown, enacted very similar reforms to what Lakewood is looking at right now in 21 and 2022, opening up neighborhoods that for a very long time where you could only build a single family house, and opening them up to a broader range of housing types, like some of the things depicted here. And this is a good case study because it's recent, but it's been enough years that we can see how it's playing out. And it's also just a very well documented example of what we have. So we don't have to guess at what the impacts would be for Lakewood. We can take a look at a city that has pretty similar housing market dynamics. So I'm just going to gloss over this next slide. I think we've kind of made this point. This just makes the point that in a building of similar sizes, you can have different configurations. You can have a big single family house, or you can have, 2 or 3 or even 4 units in there, and those are marketable at a much lower cost. So they can serve a lot of people that can't afford the biggest places. Next chart. This is a table of the housing development by type in Portland's neighborhoods that were reformed. So these used to be single family neighborhoods, and now you can build more things there. So the left side of the chart reflects that it's all houses and ADUs. Portland has extremely permissive ADU laws, so you see a lot more backyard homes there, but that's a separate subject. So the right side of this chart is 2023 and the first half of 24 after the reforms have taken hold. And one thing that is obvious from the stratification and the bars is that there's a lot more diversity in housing types, which also is one of Lakewood's goals to achieve. So it shows a lot of cottage clusters and fourplexes that have actually become the most common things being built in these neighborhoods. There's still a lot of single family homes. They're just a smaller share of the mix. And here's a big part. These units are primarily for sale. They're not for rent. These are people, they're being sold to people that are going to live in the neighborhood long term. And they're selling for about $250,000 less than new detached houses. So they're available to an entirely different segment of the market that has otherwise been priced out. Note that 250,000 differential is very similar to the data we just looked at for Lakewood, which had townhomes selling for $230,000 less. Also, this hasn't opened the floodgates for new development. it's like a couple of fourplexes and townhomes per neighborhood. Some neighborhoods have seen none. But over time, it should add up to a meaningful increase over a couple decades. In this chart, we do see less development over time, but this mostly reflects a dip in the business cycle, which is also something we're seeing here. And it's promising that a more diversity of smaller, less expensive homes are getting built. To talk about the politics and some of the political outcomes for a moment, a lot of the concerns I hear when cities in Colorado are considering allowing a diversity of development types, the exact same things came up in Portland. And I think some of these results should be pretty reassuring. So one of the common concerns is that allowing greater intensity of development, like a fourplex where you could only previously have one house, that there would be an over concentration of that development in certain neighborhoods. Maybe that's areas vulnerable to displacement, or wealthier areas that fear too much development too fast. So one of the key findings from Portland is that the development has been well distributed around the city. They've identified about 1/3 of the city as being more vulnerable to displacement, and the share of new development in these neighborhoods has been totally proportional to the amount of these neighborhoods. And the same is true for wealthier neighborhoods that have more access to jobs and transit, just about a proportional amount of development in there, as how much land they take up. Another cool finding is that there's been slightly less development in their designated historic areas, so more protection for these places. Lastly, one of the concerns is that there would be a lot more demolitions or scrapes. If you can build a couple of homes on a lot that you could previously only build one, there could be an additional economic incentive to do that. So it's a cool finding that scrapes have not increased. They've been totally flat since this reform came in. But when they do scrape an older house to build something new, they're typically building 3 or 4 units there now instead of 1 or 2 before. So better land use efficiency, more access for people, more housing options, same amount of land, same amount of uh, uh, trucks that demolish houses, whatever those things are called. Okay, this is the last segment I'm going to cover. And we've talked about the policy research and what we should expect. And I want to take a minute to look at what is actually happening on the ground. If you are someone looking for a house, do you have a range of options? And here's what we found. This is snapshots I took from Zillow earlier this week. And I hope this makes the point that this type of policy in Portland is actually delivering a whole mid-market segment that is basically non-existent in Lakewood right now. So on the left side here, I just put in filters for townhomes in Lakewood in the $350,000 to $450,000 price range that are for sale. And I put a cap on HOA fees because I'm not trying to find condo buildings, trying to find like a proper standalone townhouse or something like that. There's one result in Lakewood, and there's 44 in Portland right now. Most of these places in Portland have like a $50 HOA fee because you're not really paying for like a building and a whole set of operations there. It's just like a little bit of common ground maintenance or like the wall that separates the two townhomes. So just scrolling through a couple examples here just to see what this looks like for somebody shopping for a house. Hey, there's a cute townhouse for sale for $285,000. I highlighted a couple of features on the bottom. This is built in 2024, so you're getting a new build, $75 a month HOA. You're not going to go under from that. This is in an inner neighborhood with a bike score of 97. And it has this place is income restricted for about $100,000. The next place, similar example, $400,000. This is a 3-bed, 3-bath, 1,200 square foot place, also built in 2024. Trendy inner neighborhood, $50 a month HOA. And not to get too repetitive, but I've got one more example on here. And the point of this is just to show there's like a decent diversity of stuff on the market right now at a lot of mid price points that have just totally vanished from Lakewood. So, not to say these housing types are for everyone, but they are for a lot of people. And we talked earlier about the demand for some of these types of places. And I think that the Lakewood zoning code update is a fabulous opportunity to reintroduce this type of housing that is hotly in demand, should be really good for the environment, uh, and could be right at our fingertips here if we pass the zoning code update.
Thank you, Max. Yeah. Uh, for the last slide here, how to voice your opinion. Robert, did you want to take this slide to close us out?
Sure, yeah. If you live in Lakewood, if you work in Lakewood, etc., if you have a Lakewood business, whatever, and you want to participate in these conversations, go to livablelakewood.org and submit your contact information, and you'll receive updates about what's going on in the zoning and then other things hopefully in the future that we'll discuss and work on and advocate for in the city. On the zoning specifically, and then there's Instagram as well. You can find us if you want to do the social media stuff. The first reading for this zoning update is August 11th. And the way it works is they basically read it and you can't comment on it directly, and the city council doesn't discuss it. But if you wish to show up and sort of show support, you can do that. And you can give a general public comment about housing in general or options that aren't available. You just can't comment specifically on this zoning rewrite, but you're definitely encouraged to do so if you want to come August 11th. And if you need help with, understanding what those constraints are or anything else about how to, how it works with the comment, you can always write livablelakewood.org's contact form. And the second reading will be August 25th, and that's where really the most of the discussion will take place, and a lot of people will show up to voice their opinion. And if you want to, you know, participate in that, we would love to have as many people as possible turn out and hopefully express their support for the code, which will enable more missing middle housing options and do a lot of other things that I think are a good idea. But that's August 25th. You can comment online. I don't know exactly when that opens up, but lakewoodspeaks.org is where you can comment online. And then showing up in person again is even more impactful. So same as before, you can sign up or write on the contact form of livablelakewood.org, uh, and someone will get back to you with details and so forth if you are new to that process. A walking tour of missing middle housing in Lakewood, which the date isn't quite locked down, but to repeat myself again, livablelakewood.org is where you can sign up to get updates on stuff like that and beyond. And obviously keep an eye out for work that Sweep and other orgs are doing. That's I don't know if you have anything to plug in terms of how to follow you, but that's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen here. Um, unfortunate